The Extinction Rebellion splinter group tries and apparently fails to launch its drone assault on Heathrow. A new article in the New Yorker says we're all doomed and we might as well stop trying, prompting a furious reaction from actual climate scientists. And we get a new climate change related report on how we can most effectively adapt to some of the changes we know are coming. My name is Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show for Changemakers. So welcome to this episode where I'm trying out something new. I've been thinking through how to continue to develop this channel, particularly now it's growing, and hopefully that will be a growth that continues, maybe even accelerates. As of this week, the plan is this. One themed video in the first half of a week. So this week we had the one on Rupert Reed's call for children to be put in the front line to be arrested in their forthcoming action. A quick update on that coming up, by the way. On the Friday, there'll be a longer roundup on what's happened during the week. When I get time, I might try and break up the different segments of this episode and post them separately. As you may know, I also, from time to time, do interviews with various people for the podcast. I will continue to post those interviews on the channel at the weekend when they're available. This weekend, for instance, I'll be putting up an interview I did with Richard Walker, the Managing Director of Iceland Foods. Iceland, you may be aware, got a lot of attention when they tried to reuse a Greenpeace campaign video on palm oil instead of their usual Christmas TV advert, which then was banned and, needless to say, went viral thereafter. Richard is a highly unusual business leader, young, plain speaking, has even been on BBC Question Time debating Brexit because the people there recognise that he's a thoughtful person with some interesting things to say. We had a great conversation, so watch out for that this weekend. Anyway, that's the plan. I may not be able to keep it going 100% consistently depending on the work schedule, but we'll give it a go for a few weeks and see how it goes. So here we are with week one, and let's dive straight in. And of course, the first item is that today is the day we have been promised for the last few months when Extinction Rebellion, or at least its splinter group Heathrow Paws, said it would bring Heathrow Airport to a grinding halt. An action that, if successful, would frankly alienate lots of moderate people from the cause. And I predicted on this channel that I thought it was highly likely that the police would launch pretty robust preemptive measures since they were clearly determined not to let Heathrow be disrupted. When I predicted that on Monday, I did point out we had only a few days to wait to find out if I was completely wrong or not. Well, yesterday evening, that prediction was pretty decisively borne out when police moved in and arrested Roger Hallam and 4 of his other colleagues. Predictably, as soon as this happened, there was lots of wailing and gnashing of teeth on social media, with people saying how outrageous it was that the brutal police state was arresting peaceful protesters before a crime had even been committed. Well, actually, no. Peaceful protest, not a crime. Nobody's been arrested for it. Conspiracy to commit a crime is actually a crime. Flying drones near an airport is a crime. Quite a serious one. Deliberately conspiring to fly drones in order to disrupt flights is an even more serious crime. Police had made this statement pretty strongly in the last few days. Nobody can say the consequences of these actions were not fully explained. And the participants then went to some lengths to advertise their conspiracy on YouTube and Twitter and anywhere else they could. Here's Roger Hallam, for instance, on a video from Twitter talking about the fact he's planning to join the group in committing a serious crime at Heathrow.
My name's Roger Hallam, and I'm taking part in the Heathrow Paws, which is intending to fly drones, toy drones at head height near Heathrow.
And it's just weird that if you follow a campaign strategy that's specifically designed to get you arrested, the plan is to break the law and then say, here I am, come and get me. And then you whine when people get arrested. Now, Roger Hallam is probably very happy right now. Video of him being arrested is all over social media, cementing his leader/martyr credentials with the movement. And that's fine, give him that. Depending how hard they throw the book at him, that might even be of some value to him. My concern was that the full-scale planned action should not be successful because At that point, it would create an enormous backlash, damaging the cause that they think they're promoting and that I actually care about. The Heathrow Pause Twitter account promised that there were contingency plans and the action would go ahead, so we went to bed last night with bated breath. And we woke up to this live stream of some forlorn activists on the perimeter of Heathrow who couldn't get their drones to fly.
Basically, we've got a little technical glitch. The drone isn't flying, so we just have to improvise on plan B, and it's also very dark here. But you see, we're holding the drone head high.
I'm sure more detail will become available, but it seems likely the police were easily able to block the signals that would be used to control what were pretty flimsy and amateur-level toy drones. Now, you remember in the very first video I ever did about Extinction Rebellion some time ago, I talked about the problems of leaderless, or in their case semi-leaderless movements. Well, you can add amateurism and low skill in execution to that list. According to the latest tweet at the time of recording this, the Extinction Rebellion splinter group have said that there have been 3 more flight attempts, one of which it claimed had been successful. Here's James Brown being led away having allegedly made a successful flight. Well, it's not entirely clear what that means in this context, since there doesn't seem to have been any problems or closures at Heathrow so far, and the whole point of flying the drones was to shut the airport down. But we might have sharply revised our definition of success downwards to cope with the damp squib that this seems to have been. By and large, it seems this has been an underpowered initiative easily contained by the grown-ups, and on that basis I'm pretty pleased. Although the action has been reported mockingly by the hostile press, it nevertheless hasn't produced the huge negative backlash that could have been expected if it had been successful in its own terms. Sadly, I don't imagine that the game of cat and mouse stops here. There are always multiple ways for idiots to disrupt things, and you have to think that this early high-profile humiliation and failure, even if it's sustained throughout the rest of the day, because bearing in mind that this video might be massively out of date within hours if they come up with something new and unforeseen, nevertheless, this failure will prompt wounded egos to double down and to think about what more effective ways, perhaps not announced in advance next time, might be utilised to make the intended mark. Which wouldn't matter so much if it wasn't for the damage it will do to an issue that we need to build support and consensus for. By the way, I did say earlier that I had an update from the previous video where I talked about Rupert Reed's urging that Extinction Rebellion should aim to get children arrested. The update is simply this. A few days after posting that video, I got an email from a gentleman who's a healthcare professional. Prompted by the video, he went and had a look at Reed's original document, and what he saw was, in his mind, sufficiently serious to refer the matter to the Child Safeguarding Unit of the Norfolk Police. I'd rather assumed that since it's written in rather general terms, there wouldn't be much that the police could do unless and until something was actually acted upon. But I could well be wrong about this, and if I get word on what has happened as a result of that, I'll pass it on here. It's just a reminder to all of us that we always bear personal responsibility for our actions. If you think it's a great idea to manipulate children as a campaign tactic, such things don't happen without consequences. Let's stick for a moment on the topic of dodgy climate campaigning. 3 weeks ago, I did a video showing that Roger Hallam was wrong to suggest that the science said that 6 billion people would die from climate change within the next 70 years or so. Since I did that video, separate reviews of the evidence by others have come to the same conclusion. And individual climate scientists who have been getting asked their opinion on Twitter and elsewhere have generally been confirming this as well. At the end of one such thread, Dr. Michelle Kane added this comment: "Scientists are now not only spending time dispelling climate deniers' myths, we are also having to expend energy explaining what's incorrect from the activist side of things." And this, of course, is absolutely right. Sound programs for change come from an accurate knowledge of what's happening. And this particularly came to the fore this week when an article in the New Yorker caused a huge stir for hitting the rock bottom in terms of climate pessimism. The article by journalist Jonathan Franzen is headed, "What if we stopped pretending? The climate apocalypse is coming. To prepare for it, we need to admit that we can't prevent it." In it, Franzen dismisses scientific climate models and instead introduces us to a much more powerful form of modelling, the head of Jonathan Franzen. As a non-scientist, I do my own kind of modelling. I run various future scenarios through my brain, apply the constraints of human psychology and political reality. The scenarios which I draw from the prescriptions of policymakers and activists share certain necessary conditions. He then explains that his necessary conditions involve industry shutting down worldwide, vast sums spent by all governments, and, he adds, overwhelming numbers of human beings, including millions of government-hating Americans, need to accept high taxes and severe curtailment of their familiar lifestyles without revolting. They have to set aside nationalism and class and racial resentments. They have to make sacrifices for distant threatened nations and distant future generations. They have to be permanently terrified by hotter summers and more frequent natural disasters, rather than just getting used to them. Every day, instead of thinking about breakfast, they have to think about death. Well, no. That might be what comes out of Jonathan Franzen's head. I mean, that's a great form of modelling right there. Totally objective and scientific. Identifying a bunch of extreme things that need to be in place for the whole world to survive, that's completely scientific. Not at all to do with pre-existing wholly intuitive presuppositions. But one might argue that an even more robust process might come up with other ideas. I mean, take the UK Committee on Climate Change plan for net zero emissions by 2050. Calm, measured, proactive and far-reaching, but achievable, informed by actual expert opinion, people who are knowledgeable in their field. I know, not going to hold a candle to Franzen's head, but we can't all be so brilliant. Now, unfortunately, the more extreme such voices become, the easier it is for others to dismiss the whole thing as unhinged and divorced from reality. And that, of course, is why climate scientists are getting frustrated, because they can see their important warnings and messages getting drowned out by this sort of headline-grabbing garbage. This comment, for instance, from James Hansen, the scientist who famously warned about climate change to the US Congress 30 years ago. I find the people who think we are doomed to be very tiring and unhelpful, he said. The most catastrophic outcomes can be avoided if we are smart, and I think we are capable of being smart. I've said before that nobody on the extreme sides of this discussion actually follows the science. They only cherry-pick the things that suit their interests or their perspective. For instance, in response to my video about Roger Hallam's claims, I've had people come back at me and say, "Oh, but what about this scientist? In his opinion, we're screwed." And well, yes, that's his opinion. Well, guess what? In the scientific community, you will find, as everywhere else, all sorts of opinions. That's why we focus on the peer-reviewed science, because it gives reasonable sources that can be checked, challenged and verified. Just because something is peer-reviewed doesn't mean it's definitely correct, of course, but it means it's more than just a random opinion. It describes a version of reality that can be tested and that has at least passed a smell test from people who know the field. If you start quoting outlier voices from within the scientific community, that's fine. But why those ones and not others? After all, in the 1980s, there were people saying that we were headed for a period of global cooling. The climate change skeptics will tell you, because they love this stuff, that that was the consensus then. That's not true. A study of the published papers of that period showed fewer than 10 talking about cooling, many more talking about warming even then. So the coolers were outliers, and not even solitary outliers. Now, that doesn't mean that all of the outliers are wrong. Every new theory starts with one paper. But if you're just going to choose one or two voices because their message fits your campaign theme or the interesting model of the world you have in your brain, then it doesn't prove a thing. And you shouldn't tell yourself that just because you found someone called a scientist whose opinion matches yours, that means you're following the science. It's not how this works. Talking about things that have actual evidence, we saw a report launched this week from the Global Commission on Adaptation, a body chaired by Ban Ki-moon, former UN Secretary General, Bill Gates and Kristalina Georgieva, the chief executive of the World Bank. They looked at what sort of things we could most effectively be doing to adapt to some of the impacts that climate change will have. And they came up with 5 areas where if we spend 1.8 trillion over the next few years, it will deliver total net benefits of 7.1 trillion. The 5 areas were: 1, strengthening early warning systems, something which we know has already made a huge difference in terms of reductions of a number of people who die from a number of modern climate-related events. 2, making new infrastructure more resilient. 3, improving dryland agriculture, particularly moving to more drought-resistant strains of crops. 4, protecting mangroves. I hadn't realised they perform such an extremely useful service, but they do. And 5, improving the management of water resources. Mostly I find this a useful, informative and practical overview of an obvious plan that could make a big difference to some of the impacts that will be felt from increasing amounts of climate change. Do such things really make a difference? Well, yes. Take a look at Bangladesh. In 1970, Cyclone Bola struck and there were 300,000 deaths. An absolute terrible tragedy, I think we would all agree. They took a few steps towards better planning after that. Still, in 1991, when another cyclone struck, there were 138,000 deaths. Obviously better, still terrible. Then they created a whole local infrastructure on management of disasters. They established a set of rules for standing orders on disasters. In 2007, Cyclone Sidra came and caused 3,363 deaths. Much better, still a lot of people. That was followed by a comprehensive disaster management programme and the adoption of disaster management legislation. And all of those measures had practical improvements. Early warning systems, cyclone shelters, strengthened buildings, and all of these practical steps. This year, a cyclone came and there were 5 deaths. 5. Now, the Climate Doom Brigade generally don't engage with how effectively we can sometimes reduce the harm of certain impacts. On the other side, of course, the out-and-out sceptics will jump on these figures too readily to claim they mean we don't have to modify our behaviours at all. Anyway, there's a link to that report in the section below if you want to look at it. It has useful and interesting detail. It's not heavy going like some of these sorts of documents can be. And finally, just to lighten the mood a bit, a quick celebration of humour. Humour even more potent than watching a disconsolate eco-extremist who's been failed by his drone. As some of you know, I'm big on freedom of speech. In these days when it seems that any politically incorrect comment or allusion can get you into all sorts of trouble, it's great to note that there are some people who will see those tripwires, landmines and no-go zones and just go sailing right in anyway. My first brilliant don't give a damn humour of the moment is the forthcoming movie Jojo Rabbit. It's a comedy starring my favourite actress Scarlett Johansson, so yes, I'm that predictable, and a jovial imaginary Adolf Hitler. Jojo is a 10-year-old German boy growing up in World War II who is obsessed by all things Nazi. Then he discovers that his mother is hiding a young Jewish girl in the house and life gets complicated. Here's a bit of the trailer.
You boys will be involved in such activities as war games, ambush techniques, and blowing stuff up.
I don't think I can do this.
Was? Of course you can.
I hope it's a good movie. I hope it becomes a classic like The Producers, which is just one of the best comedies ever. But even if it turns out not to be, the fact that you can make a movie with this premise today and that you can still, as Ricky Gervais says so often, that there is no subject that cannot be the subject of comedy, I find that pretty reassuring. And my second don't give a damn humour of the moment is the new Netflix special by comedian Bill Burr called Paper Tiger. It's very sweary and it's as non-PC as you will get. I mean, breathtakingly so at points. And it's not even the biggest laugh out loud show I've ever seen. But it has its moments and it is fearless. And again, the fact you can do it and Netflix will put it out there is still something I take comfort from. Alright, that's enough for now for the first of these weekly roundups. My name's Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show.